I think that we're good to get started. So again, everyone, hello and welcome to Yahara Live. Today, we're going to be talking through what we saw at SLAS. I always say SLAS, but SLAS, and filling you in on some of the biggest takeaways we had. For our team today, we have Garrett Peterson. He's the Chief Strategy Officer at Yahara. We have James Smagala, PhD. He's our Bioinformatics Practice Manager. We have Tracy Kolakowski, PMI PMP. She's one of the project managers here. And I'm Austin Spalding, the marketing specialist. You probably have heard my voice do these intros before, but today I'm on the camera. Um, if you were at the conference, please let us know in the chat what your thoughts are about what's going on, or if you have anything that you want to add based on what we say. We'd love to hear your input. We want this to be a conversation with you guys as much as it is a conversation between ourselves. So that being said, we'll get started with one of the six big takeaways, which is that custom hardware seems to be outpacing custom software. More organizations are building or adopting specialized hardware solutions, while the software often remains tied to large instrument vendors. That model works really well in standardized environments, but smaller labs that have more diverse instrument pools frequently struggle with systems that don't integrate as seamlessly. So that's where we want to get started today. If anyone has something they want to start with based on that, I'll pass it back to you guys.
Yeah, James,
Uh,
I think you and I talked a little bit about this while we were at the conference. It was really noticeable how much custom hardware was being used. And I guess one of the things I would say is that the software that surrounds those pieces of hardware was an aspect of it. But the other thing that we had a lot of conversations was about is being able to integrate these diverse instruments into a overall laboratory, an automated overall laboratory workflow. So that was a lot of the conversations we had, and I think that was a bit different than maybe in past years.
it's definitely one of the emerging trends here. In addition to what you mentioned about sort of the software solution and looking for one that integrates across that, the push from the big vendors continues to be use the designated set of systems and you will get the integration. And what we hear from a lot of the laboratories that we talk to is the hardware has accumulated over time. We only replace it when it really is aging out. And so what we've got instead is a much more heterogeneous mix of hardware in our laboratory.
Mhm.
So this is one thing where I think we are ever so slightly out of step with the trend that you see at a big trade show like this on the sales floor and what we're hearing from folks sort of actively running laboratories. It really leaves us in an interesting spot where there isn't a clean class of solutions that'll give you
Mhm.
access to all of the different vendors, all of the different hardware to think about automation in a little more holistic way, unless you've just bought in to the big system.
Yeah, and I think that also I'm just going to kind of use this as a moment to tie in one of our the other takeaways that we were using in our marketing a lot, which is that hardware innovation is like happening really fast right now, which means
Mhm.
software innovation, like there's not as much, it's not keeping up at the same pace because there's just not as much of a focus on it. Hardware is what we're looking at. So um, with software falling behind, um, and hardware kind of coming to the forefront. I was curious if you guys had any insights on like, are we reaching the end or do you think we're seeing software? Do you think we will see software start to catch up soon, or do we think hardware is going to be the focus for a while longer?
I'm going to tell you that these things go cyclically and that we are just in a hardware dominated phase right at the moment.
Mhm.
There really is some innovation. We are seeing a number of vendors come out with new and better instrumentation. And this is the flip side of the coin from the response I just gave to kind of your first question, Austin. One of the big trends that you are seeing is that the ecosystem is opening up a little more. The hardware is coming with more API access and the assumption that
Mhm.
you will network it. that it will be available to transfer data to your cloud provider, that you will
Mhm.
be able to integrate against it. What that does in the slightly longer term is open the door for the software vendors to start to do the better integrations, think a little more across different vendors, different platforms, different instruments. And as you are seeing people buy the slightly newer instruments, they just become a lot more automatable. So
Mhm.
that's sort of the cyclic aspect of this. We're on a hardware uptrend right at the moment that will leave the door open for better software in the next 2, 3 years.
Cool. Yeah, I think that's a really good insight to share. While we're
And I
talking
think you
about,
can't.
oh,
Oh,
sorry, go ahead.
sorry. So I was going to say, and you can't really ignore the fact that AI is here and it's not going anywhere.
Mhm.
I think this is the right context for that AI question.
Hmm.
Sure, these hardware, they're becoming really innovative, but they're also being automated and they're looking for specific software that is going to integrate with these larger AI models to be able to run their workflows, maintain their inventory, and the other tasks that labs do manually. They want to try to find a way to pass that off to an AI system.
I couldn't agree more, Tracy. I mean, even just at the conference, there was a booth or two or a row or two away. There was a kind of a general purpose robotics company that had an autonomous robot there, and the reason they were there is really because of exactly what you were just saying. Is that there's labs are very seriously looking at, how do we automate using AI and using,
Mhm.
like I said, a little bit more advanced robotics than liquid handling or a carousel type of robots, to
Mhm.
really automate our processes. How do we look at using AI? There's a number of these conversations that you and I had with folks about, how do I use AI to handle integration tasks,
Mhm.
that perhaps in the past were being done with a little bit more heavy duty software platforms. So I
Yep.
definitely think that, along with the cyclical nature that James was just talking about, introducing and using AI effectively, which is something we've
Mhm.
been talking about for a year or so now, but you definitely saw this being, in the forefront of people's minds at this conference.
And also that idea of programming.
Mhm.
So, a lot of these robots are pretty autonomous already, but we saw a few that could literally take a sample and travel on an elevator to a completely different lab.
Mhm.
And that was pretty incredible. Like you have a machine that can be programmed to go to different floors within your building. And I don't know if we're going to get to this later in the conversation, Austin, but that also makes me think about this idea that we are continuing hardware innovation in these new machines, but a lot of the times companies don't invest in updating their software
Mhm.
to the latest version of the Azure workspace, the latest version of AWS. They're not looking at their cybersecurity, which is, oh, gosh, we could probably have a whole nother webinar for 3 hours on cybersecurity. Um, but it's also that idea of that investment in software has to catch up with the investment in the hardware innovation.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah,
I
that's a great pivot, Tracy. Part of the something I was going to bring up later, and I'm happy to talk about it now as long as it gets talked about today. Organizations are moving really quickly to implement new technologies, but I don't think that they're necessarily addressing scalability, DevSecOps, long-term sustainability, and I don't know that best practices are always keeping up with adoption, with the way that some of the technology like that is being moved and implemented. So I think that's a really good point and a really good thing to touch on.
I would
Garrett, sorry.
no,
Oh,
this is great. I want to follow it up just a little bit with sort of the commentary of the thing you didn't hear on the SLAS floor. Last year, there was a lot of discussion directly about AI. How are
Mm,
we going to integrate AI? I need AI. There should be AI. I have AI in my product. Why aren't you buying it? It
Well,
was
and I would say
mentioned a
though,
lot.
last year though, it was also a lot of, in fact, literally we had a number of people come up and say, our CEO says we have to start doing AI. And that was the entire, mission statement of their of their efforts.
Yes.
This year, I think it was a lot more directed, a lot more. I want to specifically use AI to integrate instruments. I want to specifically use
Mhm.
AI to enhance my automation. I think it was a much different scenario.
And that's kind of where I was going with that, Garrett, is that commentary, the flavor felt very different than a year ago. But also the AI hype has faded into a new set of tooling that is emerging that is gonna
Mhm.
just be baked in as part of your ecosystem. It will be there, it will get used, it will start to change some of your interfaces, but it's that directed nature that you were talking about
Mhm.
of I am using it specifically to accomplish this integration or assist that process in my laboratory. It was much more directed and much less somebody told me to use AI. What do I do with that?
Mhm.
That's one of the things I'd like to maybe hear your guys' commentary on is, where did we sort of see it just sort of seeping in and filling in some of the cracks this year versus last year?
Well, one of the areas, and kind of leading back a little bit to Austin, the original question is I think that historically laboratories have not necessarily emphasized software anyway. That I would say that uh, in my years when I was a CIO for laboratories, it's one of the things that I found somewhat frustrating on budget time was that, I had to work quite a bit harder to justify to the lab directors the purchasing of IT like LIMS or even
Mhm.
even like an ERP than my colleagues who are justifying spending roughly the same amount of capital on a mass spec or a set of GCMSs. And that's natural if you think about it. I mean, obviously, scientific organization led by scientists, they're probably a little more interested in the scientific equipment. However, now that we're implementing AI, and now that these systems are getting more complex, and now that we are implementing these integration systems, and now that the world is frankly just a more dangerous place to have and use software operationally, it's one of the things that I think is going to become a trend. And I think that again, we'll start seeing more conversation about this, and we're leading conversations about this, is the implementation of development and security operations or DevSecOps, because you
Mhm.
just cannot be implementing AI pipelines. You can't be implementing, complex systems. You really shouldn't be. And, James has done a number of these conversations about how you really shouldn't be doing things like bioinformatics pipelines without using good, solid DevSecOps practices. So
Mhm.
that's something that I think that we're starting to see people realize that these things can't really be just shoehorned in. They need to be using industry best practices to be supported.
So the controversial take there is your modern laboratory operation is much more of an IT operation than you know or want it to be, and you still have to deal with the security and compliance considerations around that.
Mhm.
So on this topic, do you see IT departments in labs? Do we think that that's going to be something that is going to get more of a focus in the next couple of years as AI starts to become implemented more? Do we think that the IT teams are going to start to become just as instrumental to labs, or do we think that we're going to keep finding ways to put them on the back burner in favor of the instrumentation side? And
I
if this is too
saw a lot
spicy of
of
a
this.
question, I
I saw a lot of this at SLAS. Sorry, SLAS. I went to a few of the kind of after exhibit events, and one of which was a lab tour of a company that really started out instrumentation and laboratory, and they started talking about their set of systems that is their LIMS and their workflow manager and their scheduler, and their ERP is this giant system. and they've brought it all in-house. So you were looking at a company that was established as like a kind of a research setup that would run the research of other companies. Um, all of a sudden having an IT department that was hundreds of people, which kind of blew my mind. And it was all now done internally. And kind of as I was walking the floor, a lot of those larger companies that were selling these systems, not only their hardware but their entire software platform, it was all brought in-house. So something that probably started in the lab was now doing IT to catch up with their laboratory work. Um, and developing their own set of systems. But then I think that goes back to Garrett's earlier point, where this idea of these smaller labs, maybe university-based labs or smaller startups, they don't necessarily need and or want some $1,000 subscription to a giant software platform. And so some of these folks are um, kind of treading water to figure out how they best manage their laboratory data. Um, the and I'm looking at James and thinking he's my data scientist here, right? These data points, the number of people that still said they use Excel spreadsheets was mind blowing. We're talking about 2026 Excel spreadsheets that they are trying to you know, edit and then re-import. And gosh, yeah, sorry, going down another tangent there, but very, very much so. I think IT and labs are just, married now, and there's no divorce in the near future.
I think you've touched on a really important point there in sort of the maturity model for how this goes. At the largest scales, the integrations are already there and the data handling is there. And the opportunity to get in and use some of these more advanced computing techniques is there because there's been a huge investment and we already have that expertise. On the smallest scale, back to those startup labs, of course you're running it off Excel. That's where you start. It's where everybody starts. We've all gone through the Excel phase. The I don't even think that's wrong. I think it's just a scale problem, right? You're not big enough yet. You don't have the dollars to invest to hire hundreds of people to be your IT department when your whole lab is 10 people.
But I would say though, James, what's palpably different now than in years past is the pressure to move quickly into these integrations and more complex scenarios is a lot greater than it was previously. I can't imagine there's nobody that we talked to that was using Excel was saying, and it works for us now, and we're comfortable with it.
No,
It really felt like it really feels like there's just a expectation that you're going to pretty quickly move out of that. And whereas that might have been an operational strategy before, now it's really seen as more of perhaps a proof of concept way of getting things started. But operationally, it really felt like people needed to move into more sophisticated informatics.
I think that's kind of that pressure in the middle of that maturity model. You're being squeezed to get to a much more operational model, a much better understanding of your IT operations much earlier. That's a lot of pressure on a growing mid-sized laboratory that has not achieved the international, multinational scale yet, right?
Mhm.
there still is wildly different sizes of operations to be had here. And I think that's a lot of the folks that are feeling sort of the squeeze. And a lot of the people that we talk to at SLAS, the folks that stop by the booth and don't quite have the vision for how they are going to mature their model, get to a place where their instruments really are integrated. In back to sort of the earlier point that you were making, Garrett, it's easy to understand. I need a mass spec. Here are the three vendors that would meet my need. I'll buy that one. versus the much broader landscape that goes, I need integration and operations and security and compliance. And am I outsourcing that? Am I bringing it in-house? How do I? There's a lot more open-ended set of questions that goes with that. And it's part of why it's so much easier to make the case for, I want that mass spec.
So one thing we've kind of, I've got 2 points that I wanted to get to, and I was going to talk about them differently, but I think they go so hand in hand and are pretty hand in hand with what we've been talking about that I just want to bring them up now, and we'll use this to kind of jump off, which are on one hand, technology adoption is accelerating. As you guys were mentioning last year, AI was, people were saying, oh, we know we need to use AI. Now people have more directed, this is what we're using it for, this is what we need it for. But on the other hand, new technology isn't as necessary for efficiency if, say, smaller laboratory that has runs all their stuff out of Excel. If it works and they don't plan on growing at a rapid rate and it works for them, maybe new technology isn't as necessary for them. So I kind of wanted to bring those two up because these were things that I think we heard a lot at the booth, where A, lot of really new cool hardware and software coming out, but B, do we need that at our laboratory in our
Mhm.
company? So I just want to, I know that that's not really a question. This is more of just two different ideas, but if you guys had any cool stories about this, or and also to the people in the chat, if you have anything that you noticed around either of those points, please feel free to share.
Well, well, directly to that, I will say that that's a conversation that is an age-old conversation within every laboratory. In fact, for that matter, every operation, whether it's laboratories or other businesses, asking, at what point do we need automation? What is the point of automation? Um, and that question certainly is asked there. Now, this is, SLAS is a Society for Laboratory Automation Systems. So most of the people that are attending there are interested in automating their operations. We don't, I wouldn't say that it's necessarily a broad spectrum of all laboratories out there. But what I will say is that it was noticeably different. The floor of the laboratories, the size of the laboratories, the operational sort of complexity of the laboratories that were now really, really motivated to use automation is definitely lower. Like, I could tell you, you know, in conferences past, we would talk to laboratories that had 25, 30, 35 people in them that were using Excel and saying, yeah, eventually we're going to need to move to some automation. Eventually we're going to need the limbs even. Whereas, James and I had a conversation with a university researcher was really just them and a postdoc or two, and they were feeling the pressure to be using automation so that they could really compete in their with their research. So I do think that the drive towards using automation, the drive towards using informatics to accelerate your science to just even be relevant within your marketplace is definitely significantly, like I said, the floor is significantly lower than it has been in the past. I think it's just an expectations thing. I think the technology and what AI and other automation can do, is just expected that you're taking advantage of that, and you're not trying to do all of this with just human resource.
I think this is a good chance to jump in and talk a little bit about what Yahara was kind of bringing to SLAS.
Yeah.
It was great because one of the demos that we've done in previous conferences is a digital twin setup where we have a VR headset and we invite uh, folks who are attending the conference to come and see our digital twin setup. And we can talk about that more if folks are interested. But I kind of use that as a little draw to pull people in as they're passing the booth. And it just so happened, James and I ended up talking to a pair of gentlemen from a huge pharmaceutical company. And we drew them in with the VR that they kind of scoffed at and said, oh, that's so yesterday, right? That was so yesterday. But once they were in the booth and talking to us about the different uses that can be found within these digital twin technologies, all of a sudden it was no longer just a joking chat about, oh, I've done VR to play golf or hit a baseball, it was actually talking about how this technology that you felt was so yesterday, and you're still here talking to us 15 minutes later about bioinformatics pipelines and what else Yahara could actually do with that kind of setup. Um, James, I know you got more into the weeds with that particular story. Do you want to share kind of a little more on that?
I think the follow-on comment there is really it's back to that open-ended point I was making about how broad software can be.
Mhm.
Um, and so it is somewhat hard to define on the fly exactly what the bit of software is that would change how your operation actually works. But once you get started and just have a conversation where we're going back and forth a little bit and starting to elucidate, here's the set of stuff that is actually really painful in your current processes, that you do open up the door to getting to solutioning fairly quickly. There really is a class of software that could help you solve this problem. Here are some of the ideas or things that we've done for other clients. And so, to your point about scoffing at the VR and then hanging around for 15 minutes and looking at each other and going, we did not know we needed to have this conversation. There's a lot that is hiding in your environment that we accept it has to be true because it's always been that way. And as we're sort of elucidating the stories of other labs and other vendors at SLAS and what's going on, one of the things that we're really trying to bring as part of that message is finding the specific problem that we could help you with really, really changes the conversation about software. And
Mhm.
the reason that we're interested in talking about things like AI is not to push a broad scale AI for everything solution, but rather that it lets you attack a new class of problems that are much more process and people oriented, things that would have been difficult to do with a traditional piece of software that now become accessible and part of the solution space that we could talk about. And I think once you start having those conversations, even with the very largest laboratories, there's a lot of, well, I didn't know you could do that.
Well, and back to your original question, Austin. I mean, and one of the things I really like about SLAS is that it is a conference where we meet a broad spectrum of laboratories. Like Tracy said, we talked to some of the largest, pharmaceutical companies in the world, had people there. We also talked to a number of, research laboratorians that were, members of small, less than 10-person teams. Um, and very definitely, not everybody needs a robot that moves your samples from floor to floor. That was not, and that's not our point there. However, I do think that what was interesting, again, to kind of go back, is that it's always been true that, a laboratory operations person needs to run their laboratory as efficiently and effectively and accurately as possible. And what's really different is that now the accessibility, because of these tools, and they've been around for a while longer, people are more comfortable using them. They're just less expensive. And the just explosion of the utility of these tools has made it much, much more likely that smaller operations are, while they're not using the most flashy, they're not buying the robots, but they are using AI to, analyze their protocols. They are doing something. Um, it's relatively rare for us to find somebody that didn't have a limbs, which I would say, we were at SLAS 5 years ago. One of the questions that we had on a card that we asked everybody is, do you have a limbs? And the answer 50% of the time was no. I think that's a lot less likely now that, almost everybody has a limbs or an ELN to operate with. It is definitely, the landscape is changing, but the scaling is still there. Some laboratories need a lot more technology. Some laboratories, really can be very efficient with a relatively minimal amount.
On the topic of laboratories implementing technology, and I think that maybe this is kind of based on what I talked about previously, and I don't know that I posed the question as well. But there was a sense of hesitation I got from talking to some people about implementing the newest, flashiest technology. It kind of comes from the uh, the security side. It kind of comes from not having the IT side. It kind of comes from not having the need for the full piece. But there seems to be a hesitation of, is now the right time for me to be implementing this, or should I wait another 2 or 3 years and see what comes out then? Did you
Mhm.
guys kind of feel that same level of hesitation while you were out and about on the floor? I heard it a couple times while giving people the VR headset demo, and it actually stems from the laughing at VR feeling like old news. Only a few years ago, VR kind of felt like it was a really cool thing that you could start implementing, and now it seems a little outdated. So labs are worried about that happening to whatever they implement into their workflow. So I'm curious if you guys had any other examples that you saw of something like that, where maybe a lab wanted the kind of change but wasn't sure if now was the right time for it.
You know, quite a few people about change management.
Mhm.
I think I think people by nature don't like change. And so many people were interested in these new systems, or I spoke to one woman who worked in logistics who was knew that she needed to update her systems. She knew that she was running on versions of PeopleSoft that were very old. Some of her .NET infrastructure was just old, and so um, basically she just kept patching. Right? So you get your IT department to patch this fix and patch that fix, put a hot fix there, without addressing the underlying the underlying issues, the underlying problem, the actual pain point that was driving that patching. Um, and I I made the analogy and I said to her, if you just continue patching the quilt when grandma dies, what's left? Right? There's no one to patch the quilt anymore. And so like some of these root issues really need to be addressed. And she was just nodding, and she was saying, you're right. But, and that's the big thing, right? But my organization doesn't like change. I don't have the time to invest to take these systems offline to upgrade them. We haven't thought about that in our roadmap this year, which means we won't think about it until 2027. Um, and there was just it's so much around that change management aspect that led to that hesitation. Um, Even though they knew they needed to upgrade these
Mhm.
systems.
Mhm. I
So
think that's something that's kind of interesting too in that conversation and others. It it's perhaps a bit of a warning sign for organizations, because in that case you've got, some relatively, line level managers that are pretty aware of the risk that they're taking. But it's not always boiling into the strategic leadership of the organizations, and they're not getting funding or project emphasis on that, and probably aren't aware of the risk that they're really facing. Like, they probably aren't always aware of, what vulnerability they have to unpatched systems, or to, literally, that one computer in the corner runs the whole operation and nobody really realized it. Um, and so that's kind of an interesting thing that you find in working with laboratories, and it certainly came up at SLAS and in other conversations, is that I think sometimes these risk profiles aren't super well communicated through organizationally, and understood organizationally.
and I want to follow up on something each of you both said. I want to start with Tracy's quilt of Theseus analogy, which I kind of love. Um, it is so often the philosophy that I don't know how to drive organizational change, or I know that my organization is resistant to it. So I'll just keep patching. I'll limp by, I'll make do. And what's missing in those organizations is something that both Garrett and Tracy touched on, the change management perspective. And now it's not about systems or software or IT or any of the rest of it. It really is a deliberate strategy of change management from a leadership perspective. And it's got to come from somebody high enough up in the organization to lead a more comprehensive strategy. You cannot hope that these tools will magically implement themselves and expect to get any results.
Well,
So,
and I would say that, it's also, perhaps a bit more of an opportunity for folks that are, on the line and able to see the risk to make sure that it's communicated effectively as well. I think there's a visibility aspect of this that's part of the problem.
absolutely. And it loops back around to sort of the spreadsheet aspect of the
Mhm,
conversation we
mhm,
were having just a minute ago that goes, when is the right time to adopt some of these tools? When should I be doing it? And the answer is now, but gradually.
mhm, mhm.
Instead of waiting and doing the one massive upgrade, which has to work or everything falls apart, the better strategy might be something like we are going to incrementally start addressing the highest risk points. We are going to be a little bit strategic and smooth out some of the operational issues and stop patching those systems. We're going to put a little better strategy around this, and then we're going to slowly, keep some budget, some activity going. So you are leading that change over an extended period of time and evolving toward a better end state. And I think if you are not doing that organizationally, you leave yourself open to a lot of competition on the 3-year time horizon
Mhm, mhm.
because other folks are doing it. And it's not that they have nailed the one perfect project, it's that they're trying.
Austin,
Mhm.
I know we're going to run out of time here, and I just wanted to bring one point up if I could, and get James's reaction to this one. Because one of the things that I think I noticed, and James, you and I didn't really get a chance to recap on this, but it felt to me like from a science perspective. So we talked a lot about lab operations and integration of IT and all that, but from a science perspective, one of the things that was really kind of noticeable was that it seemed like a lot of the science focus was on, single cell therapies and personalized medicine sort of derived types of things, much more so, large molecule analysis, much more so than I've seen in the past. So did you see that? And can you explain, if you did see that, can you explain why you think that might be from a science perspective?
I think it's an emerging trend over the last several years. The idea of personalized medicine has been there for a long time. The promise of it is that there really is a class of treatments that are available for your particular condition or whatever it's going to be, that it really should be possible to engineer things from your body that are accepted back by your body, to take better account of your environment and make a change, to have a little more holistic view of how we treat a person. And certainly that's, the stem cell therapy kind of aspect of this. There's a lot of that. Um, on the thing that's different is that there start to be enough data streams to support that idea. I have enough diversity and complexity of information around it that I can start to actually accomplish those things. So not only are the scientific techniques there, but the data techniques that would support it are starting to be there. Um, the other thing that gets conflated in that a little bit is the some of the more adventurous, really pushing the boundary of what the technologies are capable of. So you mentioned sort of the large molecule mass spec stories
Well,
or
and
some of these
DNA
things.
synthesis, I forgot to mention that. I mean, a
Yep.
number of DNA synthesis conversations.
So this is now the latest scientific advances turning into operational, very real lab strategies very quickly. And that scaled adoption is, I don't know that I have a great explanation for it. Let's just say I notice it, and I think that's what you're feeling too. The reason that we are so interested in any particular bit of DNA synthesis is the emergence of CRISPR and its related technologies, and some of these things that allow you access to a class of techniques that weren't there a couple of years ago. And it's not remarkable that we found a new technique. What's remarkable is that it was only a couple of years ago that that was bleeding edge science for research laboratories only, and you are seeing it now directly incorporated into operations and the newest technologies emerging from big companies. That speed really is a big trend. So don't that's part of the admonition on the software side is you may not get a chance to wait for the perfect moment to adopt. The science is moving faster, the hardware is moving faster, the software is going to have to catch up.
And I'm happy that that's where we brought this conversation back to, because actually, Garrett, that was the last big point I wanted to touch on today. Is that with the hardware innovation expanding research possibilities, it feels like the hardware that we're seeing coming out right now in this part of the cycle is really pushing smaller, like not smaller scale, that's not the right word, but like as you mentioned, like single cell therapy is DNA synthesis, things that are were just felt less accessible previously. And our my final question, I guess, to kind of pose before we call this is, do you think that there's anything we're seeing now starting to hit the research, the smaller like research labs only have access to it, that the next in a couple of years we'll start to see at a larger scale? Is there anything that you guys saw that you would like to see at a larger scale? Any cool science you saw that you think is really going to be big in the next couple of years? This is less about trends and more about like if you had any fun personal predictions coming out of this.
Well, I'll start because then I can steal it from Tracy and she'll have to think of something new. We had lunch with one of our clients there and talked about this and one of the things that and I noticed on the floor as well is that one of the areas that I think is really interesting, and as the elder statesman of this group, I'll tell you that it's maybe more pertinent to me than others, was the whole idea of longevity and using personalized medicine to impact longevity and healthy longevity. That definitely is something that I'm pretty excited about. I think some of those conversations went from what I would say, maybe a few years ago, pretty quickly felt like pseudoscience to the conversations we had today were or last week were much more like I could see that being real and I'd like to see it. So that's something I'd like to see personally happen. Things like curing ALS or curing Alzheimer's, reconstruction of cartilage and bone, those kinds of things that I find personally very exciting. Like I said, probably more personally than the rest of you, as I have a few years on you.
Oh, it's funny. That's not the one I was thinking
Ah.
of Garrett. I was actually thinking about one particular booth, which was, I believe, Finnish. Am I right, Austin, or
Tracy,
Swedish?
I think this is the one I
They
was going to bring up too, so I'm
yeah,
happy you're
they
bringing
were
it up.
they were a Nordic company, and their gimmick was kind of come in and try Finnish candy, right? But what they were talking about was audiology and how sound waves can separate cells. And I'm not a
Mhm.
science person, but it was really, really fascinating. And I will say what I actually appreciated most was that this Nordic company was actually in a partnership with UW-Madison. And so the one of the scientists that was there at the booth had actually just gotten back from a kind of large series of meetings around UW-Madison, who they are partnering with. And I just thought that was fantastic to see the European and American university system companies, and that those relationships still exist, and they should be fostered, right? They should be fostered and celebrated. And I really hope to kind of continue to see that international push forward, because holding information in silos is one thing, but information sharing can be so much more powerful.
Yeah. Yeah, I wasn't gonna focus as much on the international aspect of it as I was just that I think it's um the kind of the takeaway I had was from visiting that booth specifically, it felt like, and I saw this at a few places, there is especially research that revolves around like having actual patients as part of it. Less invasive procedures seem to be like,
Mhm.
or just
Well,
less being less invasive seems to kind of be a focus that I saw. Again, with sound waves being a way that they were like separating. Um, I was it blood? It's been a few weeks. But yeah, I think that's really cool, and I think it's cool that we're trying to use all this new hardware and software to make it as easy as possible on the people that need the research and the help from the research without being as invasive as it
mhm.
had to be in the past. And I think that's really exciting.
And I'll go with the reason everybody is doing so many of those things really is looping back around to that personalized medicine story. A lot of the focus here is on getting to a new class of treatments that should really change how you can attack a number of different conditions. And so I think for me it's not any one scientific technology, but rather a rallying cry to say we've been promised precision medicine, more individualized medicine. It's never really materialized. How are we going to get to it? And I think you're seeing a number of companies moving in that direction, and that's why those technologies are emerging, is the focus, the commitment to that idea.
Cool. All right. Well, let's wrap up with a fun question for everyone. Let's get one sentence from everyone to just kind of describe what was your experience like this year? Where did you come home with? How did you feel about it? If you could try to get it in one little sentence, what would you think? Or how would you describe it? Personally, I can get started because this was my first SLA, my first time at SLAS, and it was, to put it blunt, awesome. It was really, really cool to see how many people were there trying to connect with other companies that care as much as they do about doing good stuff. And I know that I feel like I hear a lot about things going wrong in the world right now. So it was really refreshing to see all this focus on trying to do good. And that was honestly beyond all of the instrumentation, the automation, all that. It's just the focus, the reminder that there are this many companies that are focused on trying to help people that I think is my biggest takeaway.
I'm going to go with energy and momentum. I think I felt like last year at SLAS there was a lull. Everybody was in sort of a waiting pattern. This year there was a lot more people hyped about whatever it was that they were doing, but the energy level was just a little higher overall. There's a little more momentum, a little more drive. That's the faster adoption of the technologies, it's the acceleration of the hardware, but a lot of it's about the people, right? The conversations that you have and how excited people are about whatever it is that they are working on. So that's maybe the trend for me this year.
That's where I was going to go with this, James. I was going to say very simply, talk to strangers. That's it. Yeah, I'd talk to strangers, find out what moves people,
Mhm.
right? That's it.
And for the broader audience, just so you know, Tracy is our talk to everyone specialist. She's so friendly, and if you ever just want to have a great conversation or have your project insanely well managed, I know a gal.
Well,
Oh,
I
he
certainly
said.
agree. I certainly agree with that. If I was going to use one sentence, I would say that, you know, the hardware, the science is accelerating. What was really clear is the winners that are going to come out of the next year are those that emphasize their digital infrastructure, and
Mhm.
really focus there. I think this is going to be the year of software.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys for joining me today to talk about what we saw. Thank you, everyone who joined us to watch along. I want to just go ahead and give a quick shout out for our next Yahara Live edition. It's going to be a conversation with Oris DX about how they're reshaping oral care from the ground up. It's going to be a really, really exciting one. Garrett's going to be speaking with Harold from Oris about a, a lot. It's going to be a great one. So if you want to go ahead and get registered for that, you can by scanning the QR code. Otherwise, keep an eye out for emails and social media posts. If you want to relive this event after the fact, well, it'll be shared to YouTube in the next day or two, and we'll send out a recap report based on what we talked about. So thank you guys all for joining us today, and we will see you next month.